This is where I was born. This is where I grew up. And this is where I died.
Besides being committed to literacy and information access, public librarians are also committed to the values of intellectual freedom and education. We are also passionately dedicated to engaging our public through meaningful conversations, dialogues that will hopefully enlighten each of us, even as they challenge our preconceptions.
We are so close to the Matthew Shepard case because it was just 90 miles away in Wyoming.
The brutal nature in which the murder occurred.
A spokesman for the Colorado Anti-Violence Program says this is the first time that a state hate crime law is being used in a transgendered murder case.
The word tragedy implies a tragedy is somehow unavoidable, that it is inevitably destined to occur. The fundamental error in this perspective is that Angie Zapata's murder and the murder of all transgender individuals is inherently evil. No one should be killed, hurt, or abused for being true to themselves as Angie was. Following the screening, we'll begin the panel discussion. Please adhere to the basic rules of civil discourse. During the intermission, we'll hand those out. I'm sure everyone here is here because this is a very meaningful event for us in the community, really.
Listen to them. Listen to our story, and maybe you'll see. I'm not asking that you love me. Just remember me.
Regardless of whether we identify as members of the LGBTQ community or simply citizens interested in learning more about the trans community, this evening is intended to do just that, to challenge, illuminate, and educate. And while a community film screening can't possibly ease the unimaginable pain suffered by the Zapata family over the loss of their daughter, sister, and friend, hopefully they will find some solace in the compassion shown them by the community as evidenced by your presence here this evening.
My mom would always be the one that was outspoken. If you have something to say it right now, or don't say it at all. And that's when Angie stopped going to our family functions and family reunions, and she didn't want to deal with all that.
We were hoping for a jury that would see beyond the stereotypes. We hope for a jury with a lot of college students, a jury with more women, a jury with people of color.
Because the school wouldn't let her put Angie on the school ID, she had feminized the male name that she was assigned.
I wanted to hear my baby's voice so bad.
I've been a reporter at this newspaper for a long time, covering murder trials, and I was used to juries in Weld County never even going for first-degree murder. They'd always go for the lesser included, the second-degree murder, the manslaughter, the heat of passion crimes.
What is being passed around right now is just some kind of basic ground rules for civil discourse. We have a neighbor close by, Pirate Radio. I'm kind of concerned that we have some people who come and try to stir things up. Again, we'll just take kind of a 5-minute intermission. Yeah, keep your hands raised if you'd like a note card. To begin with, I'm going to go ahead and read the introduction for the panelists here. I'm going to go ahead and just start with Alan Dominguez's introduction. Alan Dominguez received his film training from the New York Film Academy. He is an award-winning filmmaker whose short films have screened at festivals throughout the Western Hemisphere. Among the festivals to include his films are the Los Angeles Latino Film Festival, the Santa Fe Film Festival, the San Antonio Underground Film Festival, and El Festival del Nuevo Cine Latinoamericano in Havana, Cuba, which really impressed me. I need to ask him about that later. In 2007, he completed The Holes in the Door, an hour-long documentary about a police shooting in Denver and the subsequent cover-up. The film won Best Documentary USA at the Chicken Indie Film Festival. I had to ask them about that beforehand. Sorry. and was screened at several other festivals, including Cinesol Film Festival, the Baja California Film Festival, and Voces contra el Silencio, a documentary showcase in Mexico City, and the Morelia International Film Festival, Mexico, one of the largest film festivals in the Spanish-speaking world. Additionally, Alan has developed 2 original screenplays, which were both semi-finalists for the Sundance Institute's Filmmakers Lab. Alan holds a BA in Spanish and History from the University of Denver and an MA in Latin American Studies from the University of New Mexico. He lives with his wife and daughters in Denver. Kelly Winters is the founder of GID Reform Advocates, a member of the World Professional Association for Transgender Health, and an advisory board member for the Matthew Shepard Foundation and Trans Youth Family Allies. She has presented papers on the psychiatric classification of gender diversity at annual conventions of the American Psychiatric Association, the American Psychological Association, the American Counseling Association, and the Association of Women in Psychology. Kelly was instrumental in reforming Colorado driver's license policy in 2006 and in adding gender identity and expression to employment policies of the Hewlett-Packard Company. She currently lives in Loveland and is busy with a computer startup venture, which I heard a little bit about when she was talking to Rich over there earlier. And Kelly is a proud parent of 2 sons and enjoys skiing, hiking, and landscape photography. And we'll go ahead and applaud the panelists at the end. Kelly Costello is the former director of advocacy of the Colorado Anti-Violence Program, CAVP, where he served as the spokesperson for the Zapata family after Angie Zapata's death in July 2008. CAVP is a statewide organization that works to eliminate violence within and against lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer LGBTQ communities of Colorado. Most often, CAVP works with cases of domestic violence and hate crimes, but also sexual assault, police misconduct, and random acts of violence. Chris Talbot is an assistant professor and coordinator of women's studies at the University of Northern Colorado. She received her PhD in history with an emphasis on U.S. women's history from the University of Michigan in 2006, and her certificate of graduate studies in women's studies from U of M in 2005. She received her BA in history and BS in women's studies from the University of Utah in 1995. When she's not on campus, you can find Chris exploring all the wildness Colorado has to offer. Luanda Kersey is a social entrepreneur working to eradicate sexual violence in northern Colorado and is passionate about ensuring that survivors of any form of sexual violence get whatever help they need. She currently serves as the executive director of the Sexual Assault Victim Advocate Center, SAVA, with offices in Larimer and Weld counties. Formerly, Luann served as the director of Foundation Relations for Girl Scouts of Colorado, taught at UNC, as well as worked at the foundation at the University of Northern Colorado. And Dina Davies is starting her 8th year as the coordinator of the Assault Survivors Advocacy Program at the University of Northern Colorado. She is a volunteer board member for the Sexual Assault Victim Advocate Center, SAVA. She participates with the coordinating committee for victims of crime and educating the community about issues of victimization. Prior to her work with advocates and survivors, she worked 10 years in private practice where she treated perpetrators of sexual assault and domestic violence. She's been married for 14 years and has a 23-year-old stepson whom she adores and an 11-year-old daughter who is a joy. Amy Wren is presently a junior at the University of Northern Colorado studying political science and legal studies. She works for the GLBTA Resource Office as an assistant program coordinator, and her biggest passion in life is advocating for the GLBT communities. In her spare time, she likes to snowboard, play rugby, and read. And of course, Gonzalo here is on the panel as representing Angie Zapata's family, and we're very, very grateful to have everyone here with us.
It's okay.
We all knew you, friend.
Sorry about that. Uh-oh. So, would you like to go ahead and impromptu introduce yourself?
Ken Buck. Hi.
If there's anything I can share from his bio, it was that he has a handle on crime in Greeley. Okay, so for Alan here, the first question, how did you select the actress who narrated Angie's voice?
I personally do not like films that have a narrator. I would rather the people that the event or the events happen to speak for themselves. And then it really falls upon me as a director and as an editor to kind of cut and rearrange the tale in a dramatic fashion. So I played with the idea of having a narrator, and then I remember emailing my producer Jennifer, who's in the back there, And I said, well, what do you think if Angie narrated part of her story? And then she said, I think that's the best idea for at least for a couple of hours. And that was the idea originally. And the actress that narrates it is actually a student of mine, a film student of mine who, at the time I think was 14, and she just had the softest, sweetest voice. And I asked her, I said, do you mind reading a couple of lines? It will take you 5 minutes, and she said, okay. So I'm very, very grateful to Lexi. She's a sweetheart. So.
Okay, the next question is for Ken. How has this experience of the trial and viewing this movie affected you?
In a lot of ways. First, it introduced me to Kelly, and this was a really an eye-opening experience for me personally. I was personally opposed to adding the GLBT community to the hate crimes law in 2005, and I talked to Governor Owens about it. Governor Owens eventually signed the bill. I, after this case was over, wrote an editorial in the Denver Post about why I thought the GLBT community should be included in a bias-motivated hate crimes law, and why hate crimes laws were fundamentally different than other laws. And I think Jared Polis talks about the burning of a cross and how that is different in nature. So Kelly came into my office and really in a very non-threatening way said, I'm a resource, and so did a number of other people. Fred Saines, who was in this movie, Kelly, also the two Kellys. And so I really learned a lot. It's an interesting subject because it's not something that I had been exposed to. I'd known some transgender females, but I never said, hey, you want to go have a cup of coffee? Let's talk about this. And so I learned a lot personally about transitioning in this way. I thought the movie was very interesting, and I thought it did a great job of showing the challenges of transitioning, the challenges that Angie went through. If I could say one thing slightly critical of the movie, in the movie it continually compared Greeley to Laramie, Wyoming. The animal who committed this crime wasn't from Greeley. He was from the enlightened Denver metro area. And he came up to our community and he committed this horrible crime, and our jurors and our police and our DA's office did absolutely the right thing and put him away for the rest of his life. In fact, I think he got life plus 48 years or 60 years. So his corpse will sit in Canyon City long after he is dead, where it belongs. But he is, that's the only problem I have with this is this really wasn't a Greeley crime. It happened in Greeley, but it was from somebody outside our community. And I hate to blame the people in our community. In fact, we had a communication, someone, in fact she was in the movie, says something about, well, I'm taking my life in my hands, I'm leaving California and I'm going to Greeley, Colorado. She wasn't taking her life into her hands. This is a safe community and a tolerant community and an open community.
You had mentioned in the film that your office really had to kind of, carefully consider this and grapple with a lot of issues. Do you want to just kind of briefly highlight what some of those concerns were?
I think the movie mentioned factually that Angie and the defendant went to court the morning of the murder, and she was called up to court as Justin. So he was aware the morning that she had the name Justin. There were also a number of pictures in her apartment where she was dressed as Justin. And there were other facts that led us to believe that he knew long before a quick encounter. So when we charged first-degree murder, we were charging it based on the fact that it was premeditated. He was part of a gang culture, and it is strictly forbidden in a gang culture to have any homosexual relations. So if someone had found out that he had a relationship with somebody who was biologically male, he would have been violently attacked by his gang as a sanction. And we think the murder was more, I'm going to show my friends that I was surprised by this than it really was a surprise. He was left alone in the apartment for 4 or 5 hours before Angie came back and he committed the murder. And so we all along had the theory that it was a premeditated murder, and the reason for it was that she was transgender, and so the hate crime fit well. We get the opportunity to get more evidence in a case where we charge something like the hate crime. And so while we had a vigorous debate over how the jurors would react to it, I made the decision it was the right thing to do because that is really what the motive for the crime was.
Thank you. And this says, directed to Mr. Buck or other members of the Greeley community. So if there are any other panel members that would like to offer some insight. And this is an interesting question too. Were peers disrespectful at work or home after your involvement in a case?
Sure, I got, I call it feedback.
Euphemistically.
Really from both sides of the political spectrum. Initially, before the charging decision was made, I got a number of voicemails and emails that were fairly emotional. And after the charging decision was made, I got a number of voicemails, emails that were also emotional. Frankly, the job of a prosecutor isn't to weigh public opinion. There's a law, we apply the law, and we let the jury and the judge make the decision. And, it didn't concern me really what the public thought was.
How does the gender of intersex work with Colorado's and U.S. hate crime laws? If not included, what rights do intersex people have to be addressed as intersex? This wasn't addressed to any particular panel member, but if anyone go ahead, Kelly, take it.
So I can take a stab at it. Individuals born with intersex conditions are physical or chromosomal or genetic conditions that are not associated with stereotypically male or female bodies. And I know that there are a number of people in the intersex community that are concerned that they are not specifically recognized in legislation, protective legislation, that is based around sexual orientation or gender identity or gender expression. I think the intent of this legislation is to be inclusive of people whose bodies are different or whose social assignment, social gender role assignment at birth might have been made rather arbitrarily. But I think there is legitimate concern among those in the intersex community that there is not enough public awareness and it is not, they are not clearly enough recognized to possibly be prevented from slipping through the cracks. I think that might be the concern. And then here in Colorado, our hate crime statute is probably one of the more awkwardly worded in the country because gender identity and expression are subsumed under an unusual definition of sexual orientation, which is not quite right. In fact, many of us in the GLBT community spend a lot of energy trying to clarify the difference between sexual orientation and gender identity and expression, which are often confused in the public perception. And here the Colorado statute actually specifically confuses the two. But Ken and his staff made it work. Despite language that is a little bit awkward and requires some extra education effort on our part on other topics, the fact that the Colorado statute has been shown to work and work very, very well and serve justice.
Are there instances in which the hate crime law has made a difference in a verdict? In other words, has hate crime legislation helped convict offenders rather than just add to the sentence? It sounds like a
DA question.
DA question.
I think this is a case where the hate crime statute helped us convict somebody, not just to add to a sentence. In fact, the sentence is meaningless. The person is doing life without parole and then an additional year. And the only reason we add the years on is in case the legislature comes back in and says, life doesn't mean life means 40 years. And they've done that in other states, and then all of a sudden, so we add on as many years as possible to make sure that life does mean life. Those telephone calls, for example, and other things, they're immediately relevant because part of what we're trying to prove is not just that this person murdered this person in a premeditated way, but also that he did it with this motive. And so it allowed us to bring more evidence in, and I think was helpful in getting the murder conviction, but also the hate crimes.
Right. Well, hate crime legislation is meant to be reactive, and so what happens a lot of times is that this comes about once a crime has been committed, once a murder has been committed, and so one thing to keep thinking about is that sometimes it's talked about in preventative ways, but at this point, hate crime legislation is not actually written to include education, to mandate tracking from law enforcement nationally, and we've actually seen rates of violence increase since the national hate crime legislation was signed into effect, and so it becomes a complicated issue in seeing when it's being applied, how it's being applied, and just needing to create these bigger cultural shifts that we don't get to a point where we need to use them.
These crimes are so often not reported because there's no confidence among the victims and their families and their friends that anything would be done about it. And if they are reported, they're so often not investigated. And if they are investigated, they're so often not charged. And if they're charged, they're so often not prosecuted, or they're under-prosecuted. I mean, we see murders in our community that the level of violence is just horrific, as we've seen here in Greeley. But yet many prosecutors will only even go for second degree or manslaughter, and will settle for less than that if the victim is trans. So I really think these kinds of legislation can send a message that no, these lives are of value, and these crimes are to be taken seriously. And I think that was the case in Colorado, and I think that was the case that Ken very eloquently made in an editorial in the Denver Post after he began his U.S. Senate campaign, by the way, which I thought was a particular act of courage. So I think these laws aren't magic, but they do send a message that had gone unspoken for a long, long time. At least that's my view.
The next question is, I've got a transsexual friend who has taken steps to ensure that she feels safe, e.g. learning how to, I'm guessing it's going to be pee. Oh, I'm sorry, I can't read, it looks like pens. There's the Safe to Pee website. Is there a way to further instill that safety now without needing to resort to this separation of these people? Those basic bodily functions and dignity in executing them.
I'll take a stab at it.
Okay.
Basically, I think the Colorado's law says anybody can use any bathroom as long as that's what they're using it for. So if they're using it to go to the bathroom, that's okay. The law does protect them. It doesn't mean somebody's not going to come in and get upset because somebody who's trans or of other gender is using the bathroom. But it does protect them as far as the law is concerned.
Okay, great. Yeah, thanks. And I know, like at the library, we have to rove through the bathroom, so we always have to knock on the doors and go in. And we usually take people by surprise because we're, in the other bathroom.
My understanding, it's kind of like Wikipedia, so people can put in different locations where there are gender-neutral bathrooms or single-stall bathrooms, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
So there is a public accommodations law in the state of Colorado, Senate Bill 200, that allows people to, among many things, and what we saw in terms of anti-transgender backlash is it became the bathroom bill. Where it's not just about bathrooms, but within that it included people being able to use bathrooms safely. And so I would also argue that some of that safety piece needs to come from allies and people within community who are willing to step up and intervene when somebody's doing something appropriate, so it doesn't fall on the transgender community to be able to protect ourselves. I think one dynamic that was coming up in the film was this idea that, well, we need to prove that Angie had disclosed that she's transgender in order to prove these other things, but one thing that we know is that just because someone discloses doesn't ensure that they're going to be safe. So people get to disclose whenever and however feels safe and comfortable to them, and so we know that even if she disclosed early on, if she disclosed later on, as anybody in the transgender community, there's not a guarantee of safety, so we need to make sure we don't put all of the blame on somebody about whether or not they disclosed and at what point.
I was wondering if there's been a shift in attitude or perception of Angie. In the film, it talked about how there were times when people were talking behind her back, or mom had to go ahead and defend her. Has that perception changed, and has there been more acceptance since everything has happened?
Angie, myself, and my sister, we came out to my mom. So mom accepted us more. At first she was confused, and I think for the three of us, we were afraid that she was going to love us, and that didn't stop. She continues to love us. Our family, on the other hand, we still have to educate them. It's still hard as Angie lived her life as a woman. Stephanie, she's lesbian. It's still, we still have to educate them. And now on the other side, that I do what I do. I do drag. I don't live my life as a woman. I don't want to. That was another hard thing for my mom to go through. I don't want to live as a woman, so I had to really educate her.
A tragedy like this could switch some people, in a heartbeat, and make them realize that they were looking at it from the wrong perspective. Not wrong, but just from a different and ignorant perspective. But then there's others in our family that would just pretend it didn't happen. So
there's those. Yeah. It's the true Mexican culture. They don't want to change. They don't understand it, and they don't want to.
My question is for Gonzalo. Once all the national media went away, I was very proud of Greeley that we stood for this and we represent this. But what was the reaction from the community after all the cameras went away?
We still get it actually on a daily basis. We just, 3 years ago, we just, celebrate, not so much celebrate, but went to her gravesite. Mr. Ellen went up for an appeal, and so we have to deal with that now. And luckily it was denied. We were very happy to see that letter come in. But, my mom's making faces, so. But I hope that answers your question.
Well, more like just the community as a whole. How have you been treated? How has your family been treated? Once the cameras were off, I think that the national spotlight was on our community, and I think that people may have thought one thing but acted another way. And so once those cameras were gone, what was the true reality of how our community treated you all?
I have felt safe and greeted. My kids, I'm living in Brighton now because of my Stephanie, but I feel comfortable and I feel safe in Greeley. People from the community, UNC, they're like with open arms. Of course, I always get the stares, and then I stare back where I say, "What are you looking at?" But I feel so comfortable. I feel my Angie here. I feel her here. But my kids are afraid. I tell them it's not the people. It wasn't the people from Greeley. It wasn't the Greeley. It was that animal where he lived. He was the one that came out here. And I want to come back. But they don't want me. They don't want to. And they say, "Mom, where you go back?" I know, I says, I can't go back until you guys come with me. But this, to me, I feel so comfortable here, and I felt so safe. This was my, how can I say, my safe haven, and I work in Brighton, and when the kids were, "Mom, this happened," or "Mom, help me with this," I said, I'm going home. And this is my home. But because the situations between that happened, right now I can't. But I do, this community to me means everything. What you guys supported us, and always supported me. People from UNC, they've told me to go up there and talk, and I go, "What am I going to talk about? These people are college people, And Mr. Buck and Kelly and all my Kelly sandwiches there. I used to call them Kelly and Sandra, my sandwich, they always protect me. But the people from UNC, but like I said, this is my town, not my kids.
Being an intersex person, I do feel disenfranchised from not only the community, but the GOBT community, because they don't usually include the I. And then when you talk about intersex children, the first thing that usually happens to us is we're cut. To me, that's a hate crime. And but the law doesn't protect us children, or children currently. And I was wondering if there's any way to change that law or to start protecting those intersex children from having to go through the hell I went through. And I don't know, I'm not sure what else to ask about that, but it's a horrific thing to have to live through. And find out, like I did 50 years after the surgery, that I was actually born intersex. And to go through the ripping and the problems and the teasing about being physically different, let alone emotionally disenfranchised from the world. How is the law going to start addressing some of those issues? Because we're not included in the laws currently. I don't think there's any law that I know of that actually says we're going to protect intersex people, intersex children, or allow them to identify genderly as a gender being intersex.
So the issue is really, really horrific. Non-consensual surgeries that are still practiced in the United States among infants whose anatomy is considered different or unusual. And this is still inexplicably accepted medical policy in the United States, and as far as I'm concerned, it's atrocity. I would like to see it addressed as a medical policy issue first, because I believe it is malpractice, and perhaps legally as well. As an adult, I'm pretty confident, and especially now that we have a precedent, right here in Weld County, in applying the state bias crime law. I'm confident that if a person from the intersex community were a victim of a hate crime on that basis, that statute could be interpreted broadly enough based on descriptions of gender identity and gender role that might differ from someone else's perceptions of what those might be. That law would apply to all of these communities, and I think the same thing might be said about the public accommodations law, the employment law, the housing parts of the statutes as well. So that is my hope, although those have not been tested. But I totally agree that we need more education, more awareness, more inclusion of the intersex community, certainly within our broader community efforts.
The decision should really rest with the parent with education and knowledge before they just, again, believe the doctor. I don't know if there's something that could,
Currently, for the most part, parents are being told that basically an emergency, it needs to get done now, we need to fix this problem. The medical field, urologists, plastic surgeons basically made an industry out of it. They're being pressured to have the surgery done as soon as possible to normalize the child. It's just cosmetic surgery. It can wait. It can wait. Force pressure, salesmanship, it's a business, and it doesn't need to be done.
Well, that's where I'm thinking it would be good to have a resource network of individuals regionally. Does anyone else have a question? Susie, I was wondering when you were going to play book.
First of all, I'd like to thank the panel for the knowledge that they brought, or they're bringing into our community. I would like to commend District Attorney Ken Buck and his office for pursuing this case as they did. And I would like to call on all of us as a community to be tolerant and to accepting, and to one day eradicate this violent monster known as sexual assault, and to keep Angie's memory alive.
Thank you.
Hi. My question is for the whole panel. I'm curious, especially for those of you that are on the ground here in Greeley and panelists that have been in other communities showing the film, what type of creative strategies have any community members shared with you that they've taken to organize to respond to this issue, and also really just to prevent future hate violence from happening? Have you heard from any student groups or young people or just LGBTQ community like really?
With sexual assault and gender violence, we just started in Weld County in October this past year, and we're working with some different organizations to figure out how we can bring prevention education around gender violence, and based on Title IX, based on the health standards that were just mandated by the state. We in Larimer County actually went through and matched up standards to curriculum and showed the school district and how we are providing pieces for them. And so we're planning on doing the same with the Weld County districts as well. And so we hope probably within the next year, you know, we're social profits, so as we get funding, that we'll be able to bring prevention in around gender violence into the schools, so we can have kind of that two-pronged approach of prevention and intervention.
Mr. Dominguez's brother is also a school teacher at Westminster High School. These students were not classified. They were just there to bring peace. It opened up my eyes to educate them what we have to go through. It was myself that sat on that panel, Brandy Roberts, and as well as a fellow colleague of mine, Martini Monroe. We talked about what we have to go through on a daily basis. Martini was a principal of a high school, so we educate the parents, and it was really nice. So.
Yeah, and I think one of the most inspiring things that I get to see as a women's studies professor is I teach sort of a unit on kind of trans issues, and one of the most inspiring things that I see is students really wrestling with things that make them really uncomfortable, and watching them sort of transition from such discomfort with, you know, the mere idea of transness into sort of a place of more comfort with it and more sort of understanding of it and more kind of awareness, which I think sort of precedes the kind of activism that you're talking about. And I'm really glad that I get to have that opportunity to watch that sort of shift.
Branching Seeds of Resistance is the youth project. I know that they've expanded their reach up into Fort Collins.
And is that like with, oh, go ahead.
Yeah.
So I also work for CVP. So Branching Seeds of Resistance is a youth organizing project we started 2 years ago that's led by and for LGBTQ youth. And we actually, from the get-go, chose Greeley and Fort Collins as one of the two pilot areas, kind of lumping them together as Northern Colorado, and then Denver being the second pilot area. So with the project, so far we spent the first year planning, doing assessments about what types of violence prevention strategies was the community ready to implement and most interested in working towards. We have had a focus from the get-go on looking at teen dating violence and sexual violence and where those intersect with other issues. So it is, we did bring some materials that I think are just outside the door there with some little hand cards around that. We do hold regular membership meetings in Denver, and then here in Northern Colorado, we're still working on just building some really strong relationships. So if you're interested in taking a lead or just hearing more about it, definitely get in touch with us and we'll get you connected on the list. Really trying to build power in LGBTQ youth communities. So keep your eye out for that.
What resonated with me with Angie's story is that the obstacles were considerably more, but I think there's an underlying concern about what a healthy relationship looks like. How can we work together to end gender violence, period. So if anyone wants to kind of tackle that from the panel, you know, kind of chime in. If you can share ways in which you have collaborated with other agencies or organizations.
You know, just as far as the film is concerned, the idea was always to make it available to colleges and universities and libraries. Sadly, I don't own all of the footage rights yet, so that's kind of the next phase of where I'm at. It's making a film like this is always it's a daunting task because you think you're done and then you're not quite done, and you're not quite done, you're not quite done. But so I have acquired all the rights from CNN and True TV to show the film in forums like this and film festivals. But in order for it to really reach its audience, I'm still a little bit short of funds, so hopefully that'll change soon. The best news is that last week I finally signed a contract with a foreign sales agent. What that means is that they will now take the film to the foreign broadcast markets outside the United States. And so that's very exciting for me, because I know that the film will live beyond the festivals that it's showing. And that will allow it to one day be available for libraries and for colleges and universities and institutions to have, and really be a tool for education, because that was my intent. So I'm very excited about that. It'll also show in I think 4 more festivals before the end of the month. It will show in Mexico for the first time, in Puebla, and at the end of September. So again, I'm very excited about that. So hopefully, the sad thing to me would be to have taken the story as far as I've been able to take it, and then for it to go away. That would be a real tragedy to me. But fortunately, there's been enough support financially. Folks like you showing up, go to the Facebook page, like it, to make sure that we show people that there really is an audience. I can't tell you how meaningful it is to be here in Greeley. So again, thanks for having us. I don't mean to kill the evening, but again, I just wanted to publicly acknowledge you all for being here. And so keep your eyes on our website, photosofangie.com. We'll tell you where it's going next.
Yes.
We did a fair amount of outreach before the trial. I spoke to a number of groups. Spoke to a parents group. I forget the name of the acronym for it, but
PFLAG.
That's it, PFLAG. And also spoke to a group at UNC, which was fascinating because it was right before November, and I spoke to them about the fact that this is a safe community. You need to report anything suspicious, please do. I sat through the rest of their meeting, and they were organizing on how to be Republican candidates. So I was I felt like a mole in but I do think that anything our office can do in terms of outreach and trying to talk about that, perhaps.
Was the jury given kind of a briefing? Because this whole, the defense taking, the position of using the wrong pronoun. So was there an opportunity to do that, or was this just kind of a battle of wills, Angie versus Justin?
Yeah, the trial wasn't about just that issue. It was really about, was there premeditation or not? And so most of the trial was focused on the fact that Alan Andrade had this opportunity for hours to think through exactly what he was going to do and how he was going to do it. To the point where they have this special technology now, kind of CSI-like, but they found that he had wiped blood off walls. So there was a lot more premeditation than he wanted anybody to believe. I just snapped. But the real trial was about, is this first-degree murder or second? And that's why the jury took such a short time. He admitted that he was there. He admitted that he did it. He wanted to get out in 24 years.
Here you go, Kat.
I was watching a documentary several years ago about transgendered people, and how in other countries, as it showed in the documentary, this is normal, and this is accepted, and this is embraced and welcomed and respected. And in American culture, we aren't there yet. People are still afraid, and they don't understand. And I was watching about the Dominican Republic and how they told us one family story where a girl who grew up as Maria at a certain point in her life said, I want to be Alberto. And everyone accepted, this is who this person is. And so, Alberto is still accepted and still, retaining the love of family and friends. What is it about American culture that we are not at that point yet? Just if you can think of something, I'd kind of like to hear it from everybody.
Once I started looking at what it means to be transgender, I was really moved and really fascinated by the lengthy history that does exist in the world, that does exist in the non-Western world. And sadly, I think we're missing out. I mean, I really do. I believe that. I think that's a great tragedy that our culture is closed-minded to those things. And it really was an education. I'm just so grateful that I was able to have it.
It's not really a uniquely American issue. I mean, we could generalize that Western cultures are more rigid in gender role assignment than in other parts of the world, but there are big exceptions to that as well. For instance, I have a lot of good friends, and I've spent time in Thailand, which we think of as being very accepted around gender diversity. But it has a twist to it, and the twist in that part of the world is that even though there is, the kind of violence that we're talking about tonight is pretty much unheard of over somebody being different than their assigned birth sex. People are not treated unkindly or are treated violently because they don't conform to a birth sex assignment. But on the other hand, being accepted in their affirmed gender roles, they actually face barriers greater than in the United States. In the United States, we face, we tend to face hostility sometimes for being different than our birth assignment. But if we survive that somehow, then we actually can make an appeal to almost a tenet of faith in the United States around people being created equal, and we can use that to argue for civil justice remedies that allow policies to respect us in our affirmed identities. In some parts of the world, their cosmology, under the concept of dharma, there's no such thing as being born equal. Everybody is born into some level of penance for stuff we did in past lives, and God help me if that's true. And so they cannot make the kind of appeals for acceptance in our affirmed roles that we can here.
Rigidity about gender is a long-standing sort of historical piece of our heritage that is long-standing, yeah.
And there are people within the transgender community in the U.S. who have amazing families and communities who are really supportive, and there's a long history of that, but because it doesn't make good drama, it's not easily accessible to people who aren't part of that community. So that is going on, and you just may not have access to it, and some people do.
There is an increasing acceptance of sexuality studies as a field, and of the importance and the relevance of the relationship between sexuality and gender, and the ways that sexuality is intimately related to gender. I mean, one of the sort of most obvious examples of that is that people with male bodies are imagined to should express themselves in masculine ways, and part of what it means to express yourself in a masculine way is to desire women, and vice versa. And so there's sort of this interesting kind of mixture of gender and sexuality studies in the ways that they sort of cross over each other. There are some who still maintain that they should be in our separate fields, and so there's sort of some political friction about that. But by and large, what characterizes third wave feminism, one thing that characterizes third wave feminism is that incorporation of sexuality into the study of gender, and increasing understandings of how gender and sexuality really cross over each other, and the ways that sexuality and sexual desire is intimately related to gender identity, gender performance. It's not the same thing at all, but it is related.
I've been working at the LGBT Resource Office for the last 2 years, and even in the last 2 years, we've made some huge steps towards just more equality, I guess. And to start with, we're right now, and this is pretty incredible for me because we're all students in the office, and there's one graduate assistant who's a graduate student, and we're working together with some other staff and faculty on campus to put gender identity in our anti-discrimination bill at school, because it's not in UNC's bill currently. That's one big thing we're doing right now. We also do safe zone trainings, which it's like a 3-hour session educating. We have students, staff, faculty, people from graduate programs. We have over 350 people trained to be safe zone leaders, and they display a plaque on their door that basically shows that they're a safe spot for people of the GLBTIQ, OPPA, all that community. And we actually just last year put in a spectrum community on campus, which I'm the resident assistant for this year. And so that's a safe space for GLBTQA students who like to reside there. There's about 28 including me living there. And So I mean, just through steps like that, we're creating a more inclusive campus and getting out there. And our Spectrum organization, which is a student-led club, is very large this year, about 150 members, and we're just really getting out there. Good job.
Yay, that's good. That's very hopeful news. You know, maybe we should talk about you're doing some doing some training for the safe zones within our district, because we're kind of the nexus of the community. We really see a lot of different folks and work with youth, and that's really encouraging to hear. I think we're probably getting ready to wrap up, so if you would like, it's not obligatory, if you'd like to kind of, you know, offer a final word of insight or perspective, if we could just kind of go down the line, and then we'll probably, again, conclude with a moment of silence, and everyone can enjoy the rest of their evening, I guess, and have a safe drive back to Metro Denver.
I really appreciated a statement that Alan made in Westward. He said that he wouldn't mind being Ken Buck's neighbor, but he wouldn't vote for him.
I read that article differently. No, I actually read the same article, and it was very well spoken. He said we can differ on our political views.
And this is America, and I think that's great. I just wanted Alan to know that I'm looking for homes in our neighborhood. So when the time comes, we'll be ready.
That wasn't me, that was somebody else, and I won't say who it was. It was somebody else in the film that said that off the record. But my eternal respect to Mr. Buck. To be honest, I did not think he would accept our request for an interview. But to the pressure of Jennifer, his secretary succumbed. So I have Jennifer to thank for that. Yes, I have Jennifer's charm to thank for that, and Ken certainly has my undying respect for doing something that I really believe was very inconvenient for him to do. And I will always remember that, and I will always appreciate that. When we wrapped our interview, it was right as his Senate campaign was starting. And you know, we were kind of joking, it's like, well, you know, when's it going to get done? Is it going to be before the election, after the election? And then he looked me straight in the eye and said, I really don't care. You know, it's done when it's done, and I stand by what I did. And so, to him, I'm very grateful for his time and for his courage.
I just want to thank all of you for coming, and I want to express my gratitude to the entire community, to the Greeley and Weld County communities. I transitioned on the job in Greeley. I worked at Hewlett-Packard out on the edge of town. It breaks my heart to see my old building still empty and not providing jobs. But it was a very special time in my career. I really felt a connection to this community. I lived on Alberto's Chili Verde, and so you know, when this horrible thing happened, you know, in this community, that touched me very deeply, and I was honored to be able to be here to provide support, and I'm very, very honored to be here today and to see all of you here. Thank you from the bottom of my heart.
I think this concludes the evening, so I would like to end it with a moment of silence. And again, I'd like to thank the Zapata family for sharing this event with us. Thank you all very much. I know a lot of the folks just came to see the film, but hopefully they were moved to spread the word. And thank you all again.